All right, welcome back to another in my series of videos about using the Helix, Line 6 Helix to dial in some great tones. This is going to be a bit of a different video, actually. I'm a little more relaxed setting today, coffee in hand over here just off the screen. Guitars behind me, no guitar in hand, and most people that have watched most of this series have always seen me, dialing in a sound with a guitar in hand. And this time I'm going to be talking more about using the Helix in the studio as an audio interface, number one, as kind of maybe let's call the central brain of our studio. And I'm going to be talking about how we can use it for different routing possibilities. There's going to be an interesting one I'm going to talk about right off the bat here, because I've got a kind of an interesting setup here I was really trying to get the best quality audio out to you guys for what I'm going to be playing from my DAW. So I'll explain how I have it set up in a minute. It shows the flexibility of the Helix, but I'm going to talk a lot about the reamping, the routing possibilities. Also going to dive into how we can use Helix Floor or Helix LT. I don't have Helix Rack, but I mean, we could do the same thing with Helix Rack and even Helix Native in the studio to work on different productions. So we're going to dive into that, but there's going to be something else I'm going to do. This video might run a little bit longer. I know some of my videos are pretty long to begin with, but I've had a lot of requests and a lot of questions about how I go about doing working with studio production techniques, how I compose, how I come up with some musical ideas and whatnot. So I thought I would roll this all into one video, but the one thing I'm going to try to do after the fact is edit in sort of as the video goes along where you can jump to in the time if you're not interested in hearing something else. I'm going to get into talking about the Helix and reamping and whatnot right off the bat. And then after, I'll get into sort of the composing and production side of things a little bit more. And if for anybody who's not interested in that, just stop watching after the part about reamping and using the Helix in the studio. So yeah, so it might be a little long, but I just wanted to do this as I've had a lot of interest in people asking about how I go about doing that. And the way it worked out is I'm just finishing up work on my next album. And I literally just needed one more song to complete it. And I wrote this song last week in a couple days. It came together really quickly. So I'm going to show you how I use it, how I came up with the ideas and how it's kind of my process. I was also fortunate enough to have the drum track already done. So I'm going to be able to compare a little bit between the drums as I wrote them and composed them with the drum machine. Again, on this song, I feel extremely fortunate to have my good friend Marco Miniman drumming, which is always an unbelievable pleasure when I get his tracks back, because he just always takes whatever ideas I had and just raises them to an entirely new level. Marco is an absolute genius musician, genius drummer, genius composer, guitar player all around, and a great guy overall. So I feel very fortunate to have him contributing to the album. He's going to be playing on all the tracks on this album. The bass guitar parts on this song that I'm going to be using as an example today have not been done yet, but I am working with a brand new bass player that I hadn't worked with before on this project, a fellow Canadian named Jason Henry. Absolutely amazing bass player, one of the most amazing bass players I've ever worked with, and it's been such a pleasure to work with him on this project. But I haven't sent him this song yet, so you're going to be hearing the bass part that I've programmed, and I'll talk a little bit about how I do that, and then I'll send this to him, and he'll take my ideas and expand upon them, like Marco did, and as you'll hear. And then the final outcome is just so much better than what I've given them. So I'm very fortunate to work with such amazing caliber musicians, and it's nice to be the weakest link in the whole thing, because it just allows for such a better product in the end. Sorry. Okay, so I figured it would be a good opportunity then to use this song to kind of break down the reamping thing, how I use the Helix in the studio, dive into some composing, show some of the tools that I'm using. Keep something in mind, this song is not mixed. This is a very rough mix. I'm trying to get you the best audio possible. I have things balanced so it sounds all right, but this is far from what the final mix will sound like. It's more just to give you an idea of what's going on. What I thought I would do, the other day I actually, after I got Marco's drum track back, I decided, as I always do, I like to go retrack all the guitars in the song. Unless I did something on the demo That's the scratch was so good. Maybe a solo part or whatever that I just fell in love with. I'll just keep it, you know, because we're working to a click here, and we can do that. But for the most part, once Marco puts his drums down, I like to go back in and re-record everything, make sure they're just super tight with the drums. So I did that, and I thought, what the heck, I'm going to videotape myself recording all the parts, and then I thought it might be a cool way to sort of start this video off after my intro here. I'll play through the song. It's about, I don't know, 4+ minutes long, but it gives you guys an idea of what I'm dealing with. Again, it's not a final mix, but you'll just sort of hear what the ideas are. This will be with Marco's drumming. And like I said, the MIDI bass track, which actually sounds pretty good, but it's going to sound a lot better once Jason gets done with his parts. So let's do that now. I'm going to play the song. Again, if you want to skip ahead, if you're not interested in hearing, you just want to get to the other stuff, you'll probably skip ahead about 4 or 4.5 minutes from here, and you'll be at the end of it if you don't want to watch numerous versions of me plastered all over screen playing all sorts of different parts. So I'll put that on now, and then I'll see you guys on the other side, okay? All right, so that's the song, guys. I hope you liked it. It's the first time I've put that out there. I think I did a quick video the other day of me playing the solo on this song, which we'll talk about a little bit afterwards. Okay, so let's go over to Cubase. Now, a quick word about what I use for production. I use Steinberg Cubase Pro 9.5. I've been using Cubase since version 1, basically. I think I started right on 1, not when it was actually called VST, whatever it was called way back then. So I don't know if that goes back, what, 12, 13, 14 years, something like that. Don't quote me on that. But I absolutely love Cubase. It is just such a spectacular program. It keeps getting better. I highly recommend it to anybody looking for a great DAW. It does everything you could. I don't even scratch the surface of what it does because there's certain things it does that I don't even need, right? But anyways, I'll dive into sort of showing you what we're doing. So here's my project in Cubase right here. I have it set up so I have my project window. I usually run dual monitors. I have another monitor over here, which usually I'll keep like my mix control or mix panel up, mixer up on. And I'll keep my project window here so I could do editing to waves and whatever else. But for this case here, I'm doing a screen grab, so I needed to capture everything on the same screen. So I have it set so that if I just hit F3, and actually, I'm so sorry about that. I need to resize this window so it fits in with what I'm doing here. So let's just do that, and I'll drag this guy down here. I hope it's going to let me do this. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, that's going to be better. So if I hit F3 on and off, I can bring my mixer up, which we'll discuss as well after. Okay, so this is what's going on in that project. And then I can go back to my project window with all my tracks. Okay. So you've already heard the song. Like I said, I hope everybody enjoys it, and I hope, because if you don't, it's going to be a horrible video to watch, listening to terrible music that I've written. But I hope you guys enjoy it somewhat. So this was an idea that kind of came together quickly, as I mentioned. But let's talk about reamping. So first things first, let's dive into setting up our DAW to use with Helix. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do, now obviously if you're using a different DAW, maybe you're using Logic, maybe you're using Pro Tools, maybe you're using, what's a PreSonus one, Studio One, or Reaper. A funny thing is, I'm recording the audio to this into my laptop using Reaper because I only have one license for Cubase and I have one license I purchased for Reaper. So yeah, it's very flexible. So before we do this, I want to show you something neat. I'm going to pull up HX Edit here. So what I did with the Helix floor is I have my microphone going into this microphone here, recording voice, and I also needed a way to feed the output of my DAW into the Helix floor. And then I'm feeding all of that out into my other interface, which is sitting over here off camera, which is a Focusrite Claret 2 pre-USB, which I just got. Really nice interface. But I do like to have multiple interfaces for these types of things, where if I need to do something more complex, or just monitor or using Helix Native. This is a bus-powered interface with my laptop. I can take a laptop and plug my guitar in with Helix Native, basically have the Helix without having to carry around the Helix. If I'm in a hotel room or away, or just traveling, I can have that very compact. So what I've done is I've sent my DAW into path 2A on USB 3.4, and I'll show you that in the DAW in a minute. And I'm sending that out to sends 1 and 2 on the Helix floor, which are set to line out. And then I have my mic going all the way over to send 1, 2 as well. And that's feeding into the Focusrite, which is recording on Reaper on my laptop over here. It's pretty crazy. So just ignore this part of HX Edit. I'm only doing this just for the video to be able to get the audio across. But what I did is I put my actual path that I'm using to reamp for this video purpose up on the top path. So I have my amp, my split cabs here, delay, verb, EQ, dynamic. Anyways, you get the idea there. So we'll come back to this shortly, but now back to our DAW. So you said, well, okay, you saw how I had to route things kind of strange. Well, let's go back and say the first thing we're going to have to do in Cubase, we have a tab called Studio, and in there it says Studio Setup. So I can pull that up, and it says VST Audio System. So if you notice here, I have a pull down menu. I want to be careful here not to hit anything to change things up here, but I can choose ASIO Helix, Focusrite USB ASIO. Those are the two systems I have on here right now. The Focusrite's obviously being used for Reaper over on my laptop here. So I've chosen the Helix as my audio interface, and that's fine and wonderful. Everything's going to work there. I see it here, ASIO Helix. And it's giving me my input and output latency, which isn't going to be an issue for this purpose, as you'll see why. But I could change that by hitting Control Panel. I don't need to go into all that. But once I've assigned the Helix as the interface, it's going to work fine. So now if I hit play on this, I'm getting sound sent through the Helix through the settings I had in HX Edit into my other interface to record the video. Now, how to set up for reamping purposes. Okay, very simply, I could go up to Studio again and to audio connections, but if you notice, I like to use keyboard shortcuts as much as possible, and I have it set with F4. So if I hit F4, what comes up are audio connections, okay? I have inputs, I have outputs, Group FX, External FX, Control Room. Control Room is just basically set to what I'm hearing on my studio monitor, so I can control that separately. I have my output set to 3.4, okay? And if we come back to HX Edit, that's why I put USB 3.4 here on a path. So this is basically taking the output, the stereo out of my DAW, Cubase, feeding it into the Helix, and spitting it back out, send 1 and 2 to go to my other interface. Okay, pretty simple. And then the mic obviously is also going out there, and I've mixed them together, trying to get a good balance on the volume. I hope this is okay, balance between the volume and the music. It's a bit of a more complicated setup than I was hoping, but it was about the only way I could get things accomplished with it. I also have a mono out set for output 5. We'll come back to that. But here's the neat thing. So we say reamping. Well, what is reamping? Well, let's say I'm working on this song, right? And let's say I have my drums and bass down, right? And I don't know, where are we here? Let's go somewhere. Now that's the drum machine. Here's Marco's drums. Okay, and I need to record guitar to that. Well, what I could do is set up my tone on the Helix, plug into the Helix, USB 1.2 out, right? And so if I take back to F4 here, you'll notice I'm recording everything in mono, mind you. So it's just going to be input 1. That's going to be the USB 1 out of the Helix. So I could simply record my guitar track, and what you would end up with is something along these lines. Okay. Now the problem with that is then I'm stuck with that sound. So what I always do is I record the direct unprocessed signal, so the Helix is not processing it in any way, shape, or form. Okay. Now how do I do that? Well, if you notice back up to my audio connections, I have one labeled guitar, which is my input 1, which is the USB 1 out of the Helix, right? So when my guitar is plugged in there, it's going to go through all the processing of the amp, right? And if you notice here, I have it set to multi-out, which is going to be to USB 1.2, or I could just set that to USB 1.2 if I wanted to. That would be the same thing. So this particular input that I labeled guitar will get my processed Helix signal. Now this is where line 6 did something unbelievably brilliant, I think. Okay, if you notice, I labeled another input reamp, and I have that assigned to input 7. By default, the Helix is designed so that as you're playing and your processed sound is being spit out of USB 1.2, which I've assigned here, it's also allowing your direct guitar signal to go straight through to number 7, output 7 of the Helix, which would be input 7 here, right? So what I can do then is I can come over here and say, okay, there's my rhythm guitar 1, right? So if I pull this up, I see here that I have my input assigned to guitar. So that's going to be the processed signal, right? Down here, I make a second channel I call rhythm guitar 1_DI, and I set the input to that to reamp. So it's going to record just the dry guitar signal. So here again, listen to this. Here's the guitar that's been processed by Helix. Okay, now if I go and listen in solo, the track that's the DI, let's listen to that same thing now. So that's the same performance, but that's going to allow me later that if maybe I'm not happy with the tone I had on my process sound here, maybe it's too muddy, or I want more overdrive or less overdrive, I can go back in and reamp, and that's where the reamping comes in, reprocess that direct signal and get it to sound processed again with whatever the new processing is that I want. Different amp, different overdrive pedal, different effects, whatever I want. So it's kind of a fail-safe, right? I go back and I say, I performed the perfect performance, but I don't like the tone anymore. It doesn't sit in the mix well. Okay, no problem. I don't have to reperform it. So you can save yourself a lot of work. I can just go back and reprocess that dry signal. And Helix has made it so easy to do this. Just by simply assigning that output 7 to a separate track, it's as simple as that. Hitting record on both of these, it's going to record your process signal and then your unprocessed signal. And you can see, look at the waveform here versus the waveform here. It's tiny. There's almost nothing to it, right? It's almost hard to even see, but that's all you need. That's the output of your guitar, okay? You could also do this with an interface like the Focusrite. You know, you could take that and feed it into Helix Native. Something I'm going to do a video about actually separate from this. So I hope that was clear about how we accomplish getting the sounds into Helix. Okay, so now once they're in there, let's say we do want to reamp it. Okay, there's two ways we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about reamping with the Helix floor, and it would be the same for rack or LT. And we're also going to talk about using native. Now, for a lot of people who have, Helix floor, there's a great discount for native available to us. I think it's $99 US is what it costs us. Somebody who does studio recording, you're going to see why that's probably not a bad idea. But let's start by reamping this signal through our Helix floor. Okay, so first thing I have to do, let's go back to our audio connections. Now, I'll go back to outputs. I had to add one new mono output. Now, I'm using output 3 and 4 to record the DAW into Reaper, as I already explained to you. So I had to pick a different output. Well, there's lots to choose from. So I went, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I went with output 5. So that's going to allow me now to feed a mono signal out of my DAW to somewhere else. In this case, it's going to be back to the Helix floor, right? So what I do in this case then is I come over to my rhythm guitar DI, which is my unprocessed signal, right? Let's just mute our rhythm guitar 1 because we're not going to want to hear this anymore. We're going to try to change that up. What I can do, because I want to record this onto a new track, I'm going to go up and add a new, I don't want a stereo track, I want a mono track for this case. If you are recording a stereo, choose stereo, it's simple enough. And now I have a new track, which I'm going to name Rhythm Get 1 Reamp. Okay, now this I'm going to want to be set to my guitar input because that's still going to be feeding out of, just like if I was plugging my guitar into the Helix, that's what's going to be feeding the Helix process sound back into my DAW. And I want to obviously arm this for recording. Okay, now I'm going to unmute my DI track. The important thing here though is I have to go up here and I don't want it going to my stereo outs. I want it going to that new mono out that I made over here in audio connections, which is going to be output 5. Okay, so keep that in mind. Output 5 is very important. So that's set now to send this track out to my Helix. So let's go back to the Helix now. On my patch here, I have to make sure the input number 5 from my DAW is coming into HX Edit. So if you notice on your input block, I had to go and select. If I go multi guitar, aux, or variax, I'm not going to get any sound into this. But if I come down and go USB 5, this is a fully mono path. Everything's mono. I kept it as such. Okay, I'm going to turn the delay off here because I'm going to be doing a rhythm guitar track. I don't want it on there. This should be set up to go now. So if I get out of this, whatever I feed, and let's just solo these out so we don't hear the whole mix. Whatever I feed out to my DI track, out to my Helix, should come back with the process signal now. Let's listen. Okay, obviously if I get rid of my DI track, I don't get any sound. Okay, so let's just try now. Okay, what I can do with this as it's playing is I could go and play around with my amp settings. Pretty neat stuff, right? So when I mess around with that to a point that I'm happy with it, I can then just hit record, right? Let's see what happens here. Oh, what have I done with... Okay, so... And what we can see now is if I get rid of this, I come back up here. Sorry, I've got to unmonitor. We now have the processed sound. Now, one thing I always do though with this, and this is something a lot of people don't realize, is when you reamp, because there's latency involved in the system, right? Once your DAW spits this out through an output back through the Helix and process, by the time it gets back in and is recorded in your DAW, it's going to be slightly out of sync depending on your latency settings. So one thing I do, and this is very, very important, is I come into my DI'd track, I double click that and I zoom in, and I'm going to take my pencil tool. I'm going to start this up here, let's say. I'm going to zoom way in and I'm just going to draw in an audible spike in the sound. Okay, so when I record this, you'll see it right here. There's a spike now in the sound that's going to record. I'm going to use that to line the tracks up. Let me get rid of this. Okay, so watch what happens here. We'll probably hear a little tick or a spike in the sound. Watch as we approach this part here. Okay, that's all we need for now. I would normally do my reamping, but what I'm going all the way through, but what I'm going to do here is line these up now. And you'll notice if I zoom right in, notice how they're out of time. There's the beginning of the spike, and there's the spike for where it should be in our song. So what I have to do is after I reamp, I have to zoom in pretty much as close as I can get it, and then nudge this over, just grab the waveform and line them up. Now they're going to be in, you know, good enough timing, almost perfect, almost sample accurate, so that this hit is going to be at the right time, if that makes any sense. Okay, and then I can mute this, and I've got my first hit here perfectly in time. As you can hear, it falls right where it should. So that's a really interesting side point that should always be brought up when talking about reamping, for the simple reason that if we don't do that, all of our tracks are going to be slightly nudged at a time. Now, is it going to be noticeable? That really depends on how much latency is involved in your system, right? It might be as low as a few milliseconds to much higher, depending on what your computer is, your hardware, and your DAW settings are and everything. So little piece of advice to keep in mind. Let's get rid of that little spike. Okay, so that's one way to reamp, right? Using Helix For, like I said, setting up an output out of your DAW for whatever your unprocessed DI is to go back through your Helix, and then your Helix recording back on another track. But with Helix Native, there's a much easier way to do this, okay? So let's get rid of this extra track we made, which was, let's shrink these back down, which was for the purpose of recording our reamped guitar on. Let me just remove that one. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to go to my DI'd unprocessed guitar and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm simply going to duplicate that track. Okay, now what I'm going to do, the reason I duplicate it is because I don't want to get rid of my original track. All right, I want it to be there if I need it again. So I have a duplicate I can mess around with now that I'm not going to damage you know, the original track. So if I need to process it again, it's there. So what I can do with this new duplicate track now is I can just come in and I can go to an insert and add Helix Native to it. Now, what I've done here is I have, let's see here, I've imported from Helix Floor the same patch that I'm using, that I was just showing you to reamp with the Helix Floor, okay? And that's this one here, 2018/9, which is just the song working title that I put for the project. So I'll call that up. Obviously, it's going to look a little bit different because I have the Helix Floor set up to be doing this sort of complex routing thing. Let's make this bigger so we can see it. But this is the same patch now. So what I can do now is I can simply route this track through Helix Native, which it's going to do automatically right now. Okay, let's hear how that sounds, and I'll just solo this track out. Okay, what now? Something interesting happened there. Obviously, this is, I didn't realize I forgot to change a setting. It sounds really distorted and really awful. So instead of editing this out of the video, this is a good point to make. I still have this set to mono out, which is feeding the Helix Floor still. So now we're getting the Helix Floor processing the sound, and we're getting Helix Native processing the sound. It's ridiculous. It's double processing, right? So I got to come over here and change my output here to stereo out. Okay, now you'll hear a difference. Now let's compare that to my original track that I recorded. What you'll hear is it's lower in volume. So let's go to our mixer settings. I want to have these things equal. So rhythm guitar one I have panned left 66 and a volume of -7.34. So I'm going to come over here and match these settings. -7.34 and then right 66. Now they should be much closer. Aha, look at that. What a brain fart there. Left 66, I meant, sorry. So this is native. That's from the Helix Floor. That's native. That's Helix Floor. So I now have native set up to be able to possibly reamp, okay? So I could play around with this until I was happy. Probably best to just solo that track out. Okay, where is it here? Let's solo that. And we'll pull native back up again. Let's just go to... And again, I can play with my amp settings, right? And play with them until I find something I'm happy with. Maybe I want a whole different sound altogether, right? Maybe I want to go to one of my factory presets. You can just see how flexible this actually is and how we're going to be able to use this to tweak our sound in a mix without having to maybe resort to EQs and everything else, right? So I was pretty happy though with what I was using here. Maybe I don't want compression on it, maybe I do, whatever. I mean, that's not what this is really about. This is more just about showing what we can do with it. So let's say once we're happy with that, well, what happens if I put an instance of Helix Native on every track? I'm going to probably run out of processing power on my computer, right? If I pull up this, I'm doing all right. I have a pretty powerful computer, but I'm going to want other processing while I'm mixing as well. So, you know, I'm probably not going to be able to pull a Helix Native up on every track. That's going to get a little bit too crazy. So what I can do is a couple things. Helix has kind of a cool feature where it's called render in place. Okay, and that'll actually render this track down using whatever processing it has on it. So I could go render in place with render settings, It says complete signal path. Well, that's what I would want, right? And a bunch of other features here. Now, if I say render, the problem with this is taking a bit of a long time to go through it. You can see it's going to take about 3 minutes. So let's just abort that, get out of that, okay? Another way I can do it is, let's say I was happy with what I dialed in here. I could make sure I go up to native and that have this preset saved as such, right? I can then come over, actually, sorry, let me get rid of that. So I'm going to pull Helix Native off of this. Now, I have it set up so that if I choose my duplicated unprocessed sound here, I can go up to audio and it says direct offline processing. I can choose a plugin within this. This is a really nice feature of Cubase 9.5 Pro. It asked me if I want to do a new version. Let's do that. Now, this is kind of big for the screen here again. Let me resize this. So we still have native. Now, once I know, go over to my preset here, pull up the one I was using. Let's say I've decided on this as the sound I want. I can preview it. And when I'm happy with it, I just simply, I have auto apply set here. I can just come out of this. And what you're going to notice is that did that process it? Let me see here, actually. No, it didn't. Okay, so let me come back in. Sorry. Shift D. Okay, there it is. Okay, I'm going to pull auto apply off and just tell it to apply. See what it's doing here. See if it actually worked this time. Yes, okay. Now we see there's our track. There was our original one. So this one here is the one that I recorded straight with my guitar into Helix Floor and into my DAW. I don't even know if the settings were exactly the same. That's the other thing. So they may sound slightly different, but they're so close. And that in the mix with the new Helix Native one is going to sound fine as well. Okay, and there it is, right? So let me just get rid of that because I'm not going to use that for now. I'll just remove that, put my original track back in. I was pretty happy with the way the tones were. So that's how we're going to reamp using either Helix Native or Helix Floor, Helix Rack, Helix LT. I hope that was clear. I know a few little things happen, and it always does, right? There's little settings you have to be careful of and whatnot. So, so anybody who's using, Helix Native or Helix Floor or LT, Helix Rack can follow this same sort of procedure, and they're going to be able to do really wonderful things in the studio with it. All right. So that's about it for talking about how we'd use the Helix as the brains of our studio. I hope that was clear. If there's any questions about that, please leave me comments or shoot me a message. But now let's talk about production. Okay, so here's a song that I wrote. And if you notice a few things I do, right away I have a template set up in Cubase for my composing. And what that template is going to consist of is an instance of Superior Drummer 3, which again is way too big for the screen here. Hang on a second, let me resize this so you can actually see it all. Okay, there we go. Which has some really great drum sounds. I think I have that muted right now. Yes, I do. Pull that back up again. It's also got a great groove library you can pick and choose from. Amazing writing tool. You can drag the grooves down onto a timeline. So here, down here, you see the drum track that I created for this song right down here. So let's get out of that. So I have that. Another thing I use is IK Multimedia's Moto Bass which gives you a huge array of different basses and so much control over programming it with quite a realistic sound. Now keep in mind, I'm not too concerned about making the drums sound perfect or the bass sound perfect, because I know that these are all going to be replaced. In this case, I've already had the drums replaced by Marco. So, you know, I get them close to get the musician that I'm sending them to the idea that I want and let them run with that, right? Which is going to be a very important thing to allow them to do. That's the whole point in having them on here, is to give them some creative room to work, right? So here's what the drums, back on drums here. The bass would sound like with moto bass. Now it sounds a little distorted. That's because I actually have a bit of a distortion effect on to help that cut in the mix a little bit. But okay, so here's the drum machine and the bass as I wrote it for this song for the chorus section. Okay, just gets the idea across. So starting with that then, somebody has asked me before, how do you come up with ideas? Where do these things stem from? Now, that's an interesting question, because this could stem anywhere from me grabbing a guitar and noodling around until I find an idea I like or play something I like, and then build the track out from there, find a drum pattern that works, create a drum pattern that works, create a bass line that works with it, just keep building out. That's what happened with this song. Other situations might be that maybe I came up with a drum part that I really liked. Maybe I grabbed a groove in Superior Drummer and just edited it around, right? One thing I do a lot of times with Superior Drummer is, let me just pick a groove here, and I'll just drag it over here out of the way. But if I double click that, I can go to a grid editor and it gives me all the hits right here. I'm sorry, hang on a second, that's taking me back. Not sure that was coughing and spitting there, but something was going on. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay. I could say, oh, I'm really happy with that. Or I could say, well, I want to move these kicks around. Maybe I don't want that kick there. I'll move that one there and that. I've just totally changed the sound of that. Right. But in a musical way. So that's what I'll do. Is it's nice to have all these grooves at our disposal, but I don't necessarily want to just grab a canned groove that somebody else has played. I want to maybe start there. Maybe it's a pattern that has the hi-hat pattern I'm looking for, but the kick and the snare are off. Well, I'll put it in and then I'll add kicks and snares to customize it for the part that I wrote. So that's what I did in this case. So what you'll notice is I used a lot of grooves that came with Superior Drummer 3, but they're heavily edited to match whatever I came up with on the guitar. Okay, so that's how some songs start, just with the drum pattern, or maybe it starts with the guitar pattern. This particular song started with this pattern. Let me see where that would be. Right here. I'm sorry, not that pattern. Guitar 2. Would be this pattern here. See if I can find the start. There it is. It's a kind of a recurring 5/4 time signature that I really just sat down and played and liked. I said, okay, well, that's a good starting point. But I also liked it on the bass. So what I did is I said, well, let's get the bass to start the song, like I did here. Okay. You'll notice up here too, I have a time signature track and a tempo track. Cubase allows us to put those in, and it really does help us to keep track of where our time signatures are and whatnot. This just starts in 5/4 for the intro and then goes to 4/4 throughout the rest of the song. I also have a marker track so I can jump around. If you notice, I have markers: intro, verse, chorus, guitar solo, bridge, verse 2, chorus, guitar solo 2, outro, right? So if I need to go to the chorus, I can just come over here and hit 3, 4 on my number pad, 6, or shift 1, 2, 4, and be anywhere I have to be, right? If I need to go to the guitar solo. Chorus. So it gives me a really quick way to navigate through my song, right? So the bass part started off, but I thought, well, it's going to be kind of lame if it's just the bass. So I added a little bit. And this is my drum machine, really cheesy drum machine part in the beginning. I just wanted to sort of let Marco know that I want something happening on the drums there. Now, I also didn't want just to be drums and bass, so I brought in a couple guitars, really doing sparse. I wanted some space and some air to breathe there. So this is what I came up with. Now, let's listen to it with what Marco did on the drums. Pretty interesting. Very large improvement over the drum machine, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with the drum machine. It sounded fine, but I really love what Marco did with his parts there. So that was pretty cool. So as I played that, I thought, okay, well, this is great. Nothing wrong with the way that that's sounding. That's really good. But when I let the bass do its thing with those little, you know, subtle chords being played on the guitar, and then I thought I'm going to double the bass part up with that original guitar riff I wrote. But it still sounded kind of like it needed something a little more. We'd already heard that motif on the bass. Now let's add something else to it. So I added a second guitar part, which was this. Oh, I'm sorry, I always picked the wrong one there. Okay, there it is. So this is the second part. So all of the rhythm guitars combined then would be this. Okay, kind of a neat part. Now, a lot of people will say, did you use the exact same tone for both of those? And sometimes I will and sometimes I won't. But there is something I want to talk about as far as production goes. You know, if we stack together a whole bunch of guitars with the exact same tone, play with the exact same guitar, could be problematic in the mix because everything's going to sound so much the same. We're going to have to take EQ and maybe carve frequencies out. But I get around that in some ways. If you notice my rhythm guitar 1 and rhythm guitar 2, one is panned very far to the left, L66, left 66, and right 66. So I can get two of the almost same guitar parts because they're playing complementary parts and they're panned in the stereo spectrum. I'm going to be able to get away without those frequencies clashing and maybe muddying up the mix, right? So a lot of times I will use the same tones on numerous guitars, but I'll pan them around to different places so they're out of each other's way. In this case, it is the same tone, I believe. Now, one thing I am doing, I always love to finish off with a little bit more compression. This is one of my favorite compressor plugins from PSP Audioware. It's called the FET Presser. It's basically their copy of an 1176. It's amazing on guitars. Love it. Hands down favorite compressor. But again, I don't go maximum on peaks. It's reducing the gain by like 2 to 3 dB. So it's a subtle compression, but I almost put this on everything and it just polishes that mix up. Even though I've compressed in Helix already, I still find I like the sound of this, and it really gives that finished mix sound much quicker, okay? Okay, so let's come back. Now we say, okay, well that's my basic part. So with the bass and drums, that all sounds... So I was really enjoying that part, but I said, okay, it's time to bring in some sort of a melody. I always write instrumental music as if I'm writing a normal vocal pop rock song. There has to be a melody that's hummable, I hope, in the best case scenario. Some hook that's gonna catch people and make them want to keep listening or come back and listen yet again, right? So I really liked that part. So originally I was noodling around over top of it trying to find a nice melody that would work. But the problem was the 5/4 thing was a little weird. So I took the same part, and what I did is I turned it into a 4/4 part just by leaving some notes out. So what you'll hear here... Did you catch that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, versus before what we had was 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1. It almost feels more like a 10 because the second bar of 5 doesn't really have a solid accent there, but whatever. You know, you can think of it as 5 or 10 or whatever you want. That's neither here nor there. But so it worked a lot better in 4/4 for the verse. And so what I added to that were these lead guitars, as you heard in the song I played at the beginning. Now, what I did there is I let the lead guitar play the melody once, and then there's going to be basically a similar melody played with some variations, but I also brought a harmony into it the second time, as you'll hear here. Okay. Let's listen to just the lead guitars. And again, everything together would sound like this. All right. Now, how did that sound with the drum machine part instead of Marco's part? I'll just play you a little bit of that. I think I prefer Marco's part. he just adds so many cool little variations and feel to it. It's just so nice to hear those tracks back. Okay, so that's that part. Now, after that, you know, I got to that point in that song and I went, now what can I go to? And I really was hearing just a total feel change, something really interesting. So I grabbed the guitar and I was envisioning that part, and then what could I go into? And I actually came up with this, which I just doubled left and right. So instead of having two separate guitar parts playing complementary things, I have these both playing the exact same thing. And this is a guitar part that I came up with that I really fell in love with right away. Okay, and that just repeats with a melody after that. I was really liking that. And here's the original drum part I programmed to go along with that. Okay, here's what Marco played. Okay, and so important to get that part tight. It's got that funkiness, right? And there's these shots that have to be perfect. Marco's a master at this stuff, and that's why I wanted to make sure I came back in and recorded my parts to just be perfect with them. Here's what I had the bass doing on that. So listen to that bass now with the rhythm guitar. Now, I liked that rhythm guitar part, but I felt it needed something else. So I brought in another guitar playing just this. Really simple, nothing to it, but that adds something really nice to the track. So listen to how that sounds. Just helped flesh the sound out. Now, I don't know if this next part's going to make it onto the record, but here's another part that I threw in there. I think it all blends nicely and creates a really cool, funky part. Now, what happened after that is, well, I was really liking that part so much, I didn't want to really just jump into that and start doing any crazy lead playing over top of it. I thought I'm going to let that whole thing cycle once, use that part, you know, to get some mileage in the song, and then I'll bring a lead guitar in the second time through, which would be down here, playing a nice little melody I came up that kind of complements it, and then do a similar melody a second time, but add a harmony like I did with the verse, okay? So I'm considering this my chorus part. So the second time through this then, here's what I bring in as far as the lead goes. little something I need to tighten up there on the harmony part, obviously. But okay, so the way that this is all going to sound now together. So I was quite pleased with all of that, and it gave me a great structure. Now, because I have a big piece of the song here now that I can take and use again after maybe a bridge and a solo part, right? Which is what I'm going to go into next. What I always like to do, though, if I reuse those parts, I like to add some variation, whether it's going to be in the drums, whether it's going to be in the lead guitar or the rhythm guitar, or just the whole arrangement somehow, right? So we'll get to that in a second. So at this point, I said, okay, well, I had this nice little break. Which allowed me then to figure out what do I want to do solo-wise. And I heard it coming back into more of a sparse arrangement like the song started with, but I wanted to do an interesting chord progression. So I actually just wrote these chords here for the guitar solo to solo over. This recurring 8-bar section, which I think ended up being a 32-bar solo, if I'm not mistaken. It was just so nice. But because that, I mean, it's an interesting chord progression, but it needed something to build throughout so that I could react to as far as soloing goes. So my original drum and bass part that I programmed sounded like this. Notice the bass part, or sorry, the drum part is rather sparse here, right? You'll hear as it progresses through, though, it's going to kind of build and add a little bit to it. Now the drums change, right? So the brilliance of a drummer like Marco is he hears that and he knows exactly what I'm after. I don't have to tell him. He's going to just build that throughout. So listen to what Marco did with this. The fills, the different feels on the hat, and he just did an amazing job. So this is Marco's drums now. Here he'll change the feel. Chose to go to the ride, right? Beautiful. Now he's onto the crash, right? He's using this crash ride, right? Back to the hats. And he's going to lead into the bridge here with nice fill. Okay, so that was the solo part, right? So you might say, okay, well, how did that sound with the solo? Well, you heard it in the beginning, right? So I tried to build this solo the same way. Now, something to be said here. What I do when I'm working, Cubase has this great notepad feature. So if you go back, Rhythm Guitar 1, I'm using my Godin Summit Limited, and I put down the name of the patch I used on the Helix, right? And I did that for a lot of them. Now, if you notice in the guitar solo, main solo, Summit Limited with the volume rolled back to 7 on a Lone Star patch. So this is the patch I used on my Dialing in the Lone Star amp video. I loved it so much, it made it onto the album. And I just rolled the guitar volume back slightly. That guitar has Lawler El Rayo pickups. A bridge pickup, rolled back to 7, I should have written bridge pickup in there, but I didn't. Then the outro solo is going to be that same patch, but the volume on 10, right? So there's a difference. So here's how that sounded with the volume rolled back to 7. Right. So you really heard how it was so nice to be able to play off of what Marco was doing there, and he just built a beautiful track. At that point there, then I headed into what I consider the bridge section of the song. Other people might name it different. You know, this obviously isn't a vocal song, right? So the chord progression here kind of complements what we were just doing, but I wanted something to be a little bit different than what we were just hearing on the guitar solo. So here's the bridge part. Okay. A word about the solo though, before I jump into this. The guitar solo, I wrote those chords and then I tried playing about 2 or 3 takes, and for whatever reason that day, nothing I was playing I was happy with. I was just kind of like, nah. You know, I got up and I walked away from it. And later that night, I just was sitting down relaxing for a bit, watching a hockey game or something. And right before I got up to go to bed, I said, you know what, I'm going to just give this another try. And I sat down, I recorded 1 take, and that's what came out. Everything was fine on that 1 take, except for I think the last bar, I was kind of not happy with what I played. So I transcribed the solo the next day exactly as I played it, and I just like made something up for the last part. And that's a solo. So same with the end part, the end solo that we'll get to. Again, that was just me playing something right off the cuff. I liked everything except for like 1 or 2 notes. So a lot of times I'll work like that with the solo. I always just try to improvise something. And if there's like 5 or 10% of it that I don't like, I'll just transcribe the whole solo again exactly as I played it. And I can usually do that very quickly. That's another thing I do. If you notice here, I have Guitar Pro always up and running. And as I'm composing, I always transcribe stuff so I can come back and, you know, if I'm working on 2 or 3 songs at a time, I might go, what was that part I was playing? I don't want to forget, and I want to be able to get a workflow going. So for instance, here is, where's the guitar solo stuff? Okay, so here is the guitar solo that I played and transcribed starting here all through there, and then I have the outro solo right here. So I'm able to go back and redo those if I don't like something or fix a note or whatever, and always playing it in one pass though. None of this like, oh, I'm going to punch in this note, I'm going to recreate a solo that's not real. You know, it's always a reaction to what I've played. Then I'll figure it out, and maybe, you know, you got to live with the record forever. It's not like a live thing where you play your solo and you go, maybe there's something I would have liked to do a little bit better there, but it's live, whatever. You know, somebody probably videotaped it and put it on YouTube anyways, but okay. So anyway, so then we go off to the bridge, and over this chord progression I just played you, I wanted to have a little bit more of a composed part rather than, you know, just improvising. So I came up with this section to go with that. And the way that sounds with everything. Okay, and that was that part. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if you want to hear a little bit of the solo just soloed. This is what the guitar tone was. So that's what that tone is like. All right, so then we're on to a part now where I said I want to go back and start revisiting what I wrote in the beginning, the verse and the chorus and whatnot. So I went back to another verse, but the way I started this verse was very different. I just hit a big chord leading out of the bridge to lead back into this verse. So listen to the difference and you'll hear some variations going on here now. Oh, I better unsolo that part. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So this is the bridge. And then back into our theme that the song started with. Re-perform the melody. Little variations. I don't know if you picked up on that. Like, these are the little things I'd like to put in the second time. I don't want to play everything exactly the same. Okay, so little variations just to keep things a little bit different. So that part stays like that. I then go into the chorus, which is the same thing as the first time, but Marco does something so cool here. He knows that I have this part. You know, I love this funky part so much that I wanted to use it enough. You hate to take a part like that and not play it enough, but you also hate to overuse it. But with a guy like Marco, he heard these parts recurring and he put this really cool double kick thing in after the fact. So listen as we play through this. Here's where the variation comes from compared to the first time. So far, pretty much exactly like what we heard the first time, right? Now listen to the drums. So cool because he really built the excitement and the energy and prevented me from having to maybe play around with the guitar parts as much because it was such a cool difference between what he played the first time and the second time. So that was awesome. Well, composing now, here I am, I'm around the 4-minute and 15-second mark of the song. I'm going, the song is long enough now, but that was such a cool groove. I thought I'm going to now take this part and turn it into a guitar solo section. I'm going to solo over the end part. Do something kind of cool and funky because it seemed like a nice part to do that over. So here's what I came up with solo wise. So this is the outro guitar solo. And I believe he kept the double kick going through, which was awesome. Okay, so that solo sounds like this. Okay, and that's the Lone Star patch again. That's the new Cali, Texas channel 2, I believe. So here's that solo again in the mix. Let's maybe bump it up a touch. So I was pretty happy with that. Now, the outro. I said, okay, I want to do something, but I want to have a real cool, funky, abrupt ending. So I played around with this same section and I just wrote this on the guitar first to sound like this. Same part, just cut short. So I wrote a bass and drum part. Here's the original drum machine part. And here's what Marco did with it. Great. Now, here's with all the other parts, and I'm also going to play the solo again, just so you can hear how he comes out of it and goes back to the drum part that he was playing before, back to that closed hi-hat funky part. So here's the solo into the end, and then the song's over. And there you have it, about a 4-minute and 35-ish second song. So that is, I guess, about all I could say about how I would produce a song in a very large nutshell. I see my camera is at around an hour and 15 minutes and has, I think, cut off 2 or 3 times. I think it only does like 30 minutes of video at a time. It's kind of annoying, and then it kind of has a space. So if you see a break in the video, that's why. I have to edit it afterwards. But I don't know if anybody enjoyed that. I know I had a lot of requests to do something like this, and I thought I would take the opportunity to try it. Like I said, you know, I wanted to do the Helix stuff at the beginning. This was all done in the Helix with the Helix floor as my audio interface, as my reamping device, as well as Helix Native, like I talked about, right? All the guitar tones, all the DIs, absolutely everything. My speakers, my computer monitors are plugged right in the back of this. My headphones are plugged into this. It's everything that you need to do a full-blown studio production. I mean, obviously the software as well, right? But if there's any questions or comments about that, please leave me them. I'll get back to them. Hit the subscribe button, please, guys. I'm so happy with the support and all the great comments I'm getting. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to be able to do these and that, you know, people actually are appreciating them. My album is almost done. It's coming out. If you like what you hear, keep an eye out for it. I'll be talking about it more. I'm going to be doing more videos with some of the music off of it. It's going to be probably 8 to 10 song album. Haven't decided exactly yet there, but it's getting close. So if you guys like what you hear, then keep it in mind. And I really, really do appreciate that. So anyways, thanks again, guys. Sorry for going on so long. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon with some more content. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.